My name's Tom Burns. I'm with Quanto Consultants. I get the pleasure of moderating these two wonderful people who volunteered to give us a little bit of time this afternoon. I will do some introductions and then pass it over to the first presenter. First, who will be Chris Fundel from Michigan Department of Transportation. He manages the rail safety section over there and does a lot of 130 projects, Section 130 projects and that sort of thing. And then we will have Julie Johnston from FHWA. She's a program manager over there, but just as importantly, if not more importantly, is the one who is currently running communities of interest and managing all that sort of stuff as we go through the process of plating. I think it was Chris over there. And so with that, I'm going to get right out of the way and let Chris start his presentation.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to participate. I'm going to do a share screen, and ideally, you should see the presentation here shortly. And someone please let me know if you can see it. Okay, my screen was a little bit slow in transitioning over, but now it worked. Okay, so you should be seeing the first slide, which is the State of Michigan Rail Overview. I wanted to start out by giving just a brief historical background about our state and rail so we can put the master agreements and maintenance discussion into better context. So, established in 1837, our state had a significant number of logging and trade routes prior to the initial railroads that were built in the early 1840s. So we have a pretty good mix in the state in terms of roads that existed before railroads and in outlying areas of the state where the railroads actually brought communities into existence. So it's a pretty interesting state in that respect, full of history. Um, we peaked at around 10,000 rail miles around the early 1900s, and that slowly declined until presently we're sitting around 3,600 miles. Out of those 3,600 miles of rail in the state, there are 665 state-owned miles, and you can see that on the map there. You see there are five different systems that the state owns and manages. Four of them are freight exclusive lines. One in the thumb operated by Huron and Eastern, one in the top right corner of the mitten by Lake State, the large one in the center by Great Lakes Central, small one in the center lower peninsula operated by Indiana Northeastern, and then the blue line is our most recent acquisition when MDOT purchased the Dearborn to Kalamazoo segment of the former New York Central Conrail Norfolk Southern corridor that we now own and operate. So on this network, we have more than 30 unique rail operators. We've got four Class 1s, roughly 25 short lines, and then a very large handful of non-traditional rail operators. Um, Talking like Detroit Edison, General Motors, Chrysler, Ford, museums. There are a number of non-traditional rail operators in the state that actually own tracks that cross roads. And on that road system, we currently have more than 350 different road agencies. So there'll be a little more detail on that on the next slide, but that's kind of like the big picture of what the state owns and what we have to manage in terms of our network and all the projects that could take place on that network. As far as our crossings go and the different programs that we have, again, spread across that 3,600 miles, we've got about 4,600 total crossings. A little over 200 of those are on the state-owned highway system, and 4,400 of them are on local roads. So, and those would be roads under county, city, village jurisdiction. If you look at our inventory, we've got roughly 2,400 active warning systems, which means we still have around 2,200 passive warning systems. And just for some perspective in terms of what we're dealing with statewide, this chart shows an example of our Section 130 progress over the years. So you can see back in the mid 80s, we had roughly about a crash a day in the state and close to 30 fatalities per year. What you don't see in the slide is 10 years prior to that, in the mid 70s, we had roughly 760 crashes per year, so about two crashes a day and around 50 fatalities each year. So you can see through that chart the success of the Section 130 program as we've continually just driven that number down. In 2018 and in 2020, we had zero fatalities, which was the first time since railroads existed in our state that we had zero fatalities at grade crossings. So we're pretty pleased with that. And it's kind of a testament to how our crossing agreements and maintenance activities work in the big picture. So when you look at this chart, you see the picture of the grade crossing there. And obviously, we're talking about how do we manage our federal and state funding. We have roughly anywhere between 75 to 100 projects per year. And that's split between around 20 to 25 or so Section 130 projects that we can afford to do with the set aside that we get, and anywhere between 50 to 70 surface projects. And we have separate dedicated state money that we use to not only supplement the Section 130 program to be able to do more of the safety projects with active warning devices, but we have a standalone set aside that allows us to put money into rebuilding grade crossings. And that's a competitive program done in partnership between the local road authorities and the railroads. And these are grant funds. We pay 60% and the railroads pay 40%. And obviously the programs that we use for all of this work, we've got a local grade crossing surface program that I mentioned. We also have probably the country's most aggressive crossing closure and removal program. We will award up to $200,000 to $275,000 as an incentive payment to a community if they elect to close a grade crossing. So we're pretty proud of that. We've closed a couple hundred crossings over the course of the last 20 years that this program has been in existence. So these are all positives in our public crossing inventory. And again, you see the bottom there, we have a track relocation program. It's comparable to the crossing closure program. But in this case, we look for opportunities to intelligently realign track and maintain rail access and service, but realign the track in a manner that grade crossings are eliminated. And again, all these things relate to our crossing agreements. So let's talk about railroad master agreements for a second. So, how did this happen before 1994? And I use 1994 as a benchmark because the state recodified all of its railroad laws in 1993. So there had been a number of different laws that governed how you'd set up a crossing, how you had to maintain a crossing. All those types of things were in a scattered bunch of laws that hadn't been looked at or changed for a long time. And in the recodification, they brought everything into one area and fixed a bunch of things and made it much easier for us to be able to proceed with projects and keep everything more consistent. So before 1994, there were project-specific contracts for doing railroad work. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of these scattered over the years. We only had one master agreement prior to 1993. And in essence, it was basic chaos theory. I have access to a century's worth of old documents. Anything that was a contract has been preserved, and we've got it in our archives. I've seen crossing agreements where the community had to promise to keep a crossing shanty painted a certain color with a certain color roof. I've seen active maintenance payments at $10 a month forever. I've seen active crossing warning device maintenance agreements where it's spelled out that the community had to provide, a certain number of sheep and chickens to be harvested by railroad entities. You'd be amazed at the stuff that went down in the late 1800s and the early 1900s when people are struggling to put this together. So, in essence, that type of kind of do the best you can mentality lasted a long time until 1994 and the recodification, in which time we then developed a number of master agreements. And we've got master agreements with almost every road in the state. The minor exceptions would be your short line or tourist operations that may only have one or two crossings. and it just didn't make sense to do one with them because either A, their crossing inventory didn't suggest that they'd have any projects coming up, or it just wasn't practical for a smaller operation to enter into something like that. So having the master agreements ends up with a standardized practice and the ability, anytime we have a project, to simply issue an authorization under that agreement, which takes all the time and negotiation and strategy out of contract writing and into making sure that we're doing our projects the right way, because everything is outlined up front, and it should be relatively easy for people to be able to handle. And it's worked well as long as I've been with the department for almost 25 years, and we haven't had any type of pushback or complaint or anybody saying that, gosh, these are outdated. We need to redo them. Although they are starting to get long in the tooth, and we are making an effort to try to get those updated, but that's not accomplished quite yet. So again, I hate when people have these types of slides, so my apologies. I hate lots of words on slides because everyone can just read them. But absent putting up a 14 or 15-page master agreement, there's really no other good way to be able to share with you what our master agreements seek to do and actually do. So, in essence, there's a preamble in there. It talks about the basic concepts of who owns what, who's obligated to do what. It establishes MDOT's right to order work to be done. It establishes the rights of local road authorities to partner with the department to get work done. It recognizes the mutual need for the parties to be working together. It defines how we're going to determine the scope and cost. It talks about the possible different sources of financing, and it spells out the authorization process. Most importantly, though, it covers all of the appropriate FHWA regulations that govern use of the Section 130 money. It spells out the federal and state record keeping and audit process. It spells out the subcontract procurement and approval procedures. It talks about indemnification. We talk about prohibition of discrimination and civil rights. It talks about some of MDOT's insurance requirements. And most importantly, it reaffirms our statutory authority over public safety at grade crossings. And the other thing that it does very clearly in every one of these is that it establishes that after work is complete, the maintenance of the crossing project, whether it's active warning devices or whether it's a surface project or whether it's a track relocation project, it says that maintenance of those facilities after the project is over is per the law. So what's the law? Well, the law is Act 354, the Railroad Code of 1993, as I alluded to previously. And again, this kind of took all of the disparate duties and expenses that have been scattered throughout the Railroad Code, and it compiled it into one logical place, and it defines some cost sharing. So under our Section 309, you can see at the top, as far as surfaces go, the railroads are always responsible for everything between the rails and to a point 1 foot outside the edge of the tie structure. Road authorities are responsible for construction and cost of everything else that leads up to that. And that's a true statement for the sidewalk facility and any related pathway facilities that may be a part of the entire crossing environment. Understanding that the crossing environment by FRA definition is everything within the intersecting right-of-way lines. So when we have a road and it has a sidewalk with it or has a pathway with it, and it all falls within the public road right-of-way, that is considered under one NI number to be one crossing. Under the active warning devices section, Section 315, the railroad is responsible for performing all of the maintenance activities on the active warning device system per the FRA regulations. But one of the things that we do is a little bit differently here in Michigan is the road authority is responsible for approximately 50% of the maintenance cost for active warning devices. So as many of you probably know, there's some monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, biennial, 5-year, 10-year required inspections for each of the individual components of an active warning system. And the railroad incurs labor, material, equipment cost in going out to perform those tasks. And for 30 plus years. We've kind of quantified that, and we solicited feedback from the railroads on how much that cost. Um, the railroad code required us to do a study on that. We'd always report that back to the legislature. The last time we did that, we reported the actual accurate cost that we got in from the railroads and said, okay, this is what it costs per year to maintain lights and gates at a single track. And they didn't like the results, so they decided to negotiate, and they've done something different. They used the numbers that we gave them as kind of like a starting point, but then they did some negotiation and decided, okay, these are the dollar amounts that these costs are going to be in the future, and we're going to put a multiplier on that. I think it's like 6% or something like that. I'm quoting it wrong, I'm sure, but every even numbered year they apply that multiplier to the old number, and then that fee goes up. And so that number in the ballpark range is around anywhere around $2,000 up to $5,000 is what the road authorities have to pay to the railroads for their cost of maintaining a set of active warning devices. And there are 8 different categories depending on whether it's a single track or double track or just flashers or flashers with gates or flashers with gates and cantilevers. It's fairly accurately represents roughly about half what the railroads are paying. But again, this goes back to what I said on the prior slide in terms of in the past, these numbers were all over the board between different road authorities and different railroads. And when we recodified, it gave a great opportunity to kind of standardize that. So everyone's singing from the same hymn book. And ideally, moving forward, these numbers continue to be fair. And our system of not only the master agreements, but the fact that the maintenance obligations are defined in law, should we've benefited from it. We think it's a good system, and we'd like to believe that it will carry us forward in the future and serve us well. So, um, I don't have anything else. Again, I thank everyone for their time. I'm going to stop sharing, and um, thank you all.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. We appreciate it. That's great. And one thing I maybe didn't mention at the beginning, we do questions at the end of this. So if you want to put any questions that you might have in the chat box, we will get to them and you will be in the front of the line. You can do that throughout the time that Chris was speaking or as Julie is speaking here. And speaking of Julie speaking, I will give it over to her to do her presentation. So take it away, Julie.
Yeah, hi everyone. Let's see. We can still see your presentation, Chris. I do not have a formal presentation. I'm just going to talk from some notes I have here in front of me, but feel free to ask any questions in chat, like Tom said, and we'll get to them as we can. So again, my name is Julie Johnston. I work at Federal Highway Administration. I manage the utility, railroad, and value engineering programs. For our Office of Infrastructure. So in our Office of Infrastructure under the Program Management of Railroads, we handle things like railroad coordination, flagging, right of entry, things like that. The Section 130 program is run out of our safety office, and we work closely together to make sure that we're all on the same page. Just a little bit of background. Railroads have been identified as a top priority for many state DOTs and the division offices. And so we are committed to carrying forward the Federal Highway Railroad Community of Interest program that was started back in, I think it was 2019. Maybe it was 2016, something like that. But anyway, there was some money through SHARP 2 that established this Railroad Community of Interest. And the objective was to strive for some open communication with the goal of helping streamline coordination efforts between the railroads and the state DOTs. The group meets virtually and in person. Historically, it's met 2 to 3 times per year, nationally and regionally. That's probably going to be cut back a little bit because of our travel budget has been cut quite a bit. So, but we still are committed to having some in-person ones. So be on the lookout for those coming up soon, hopefully. There's currently about 200 members, maybe a little bit more, that meet for our railroad community of interest meetings. We have 30 plus railroad industry participants, six of the class one railroads, along with some short lines. We have 47 DOTs that participate, as well as some federal agencies such as FRA, FHWA division offices and headquarters. And then we also have some AASHTO representation as well. Some of the topics that are discussed at these meetings, flagging during highway construction, that's a big topic. Plan reviews by railroads for adjacent highway projects, reimbursement payment from state DOT to railroads, state railroad agreements, Section 130 projects, and then, of course, various other federal regulations that we talk about. Flagging during highway construction. This is a major pain point, as I'm sure you all probably know. Whenever a contractor works near a railroad track, a flagger is required. Many railroads are now allowing the use of third-party flagging companies, but they must be pre-certified with that specific railroad. I don't know if anybody here is from Pennsylvania DOT, but I know that PennDOT worked with the Federal Highway Division Office using some, I can't remember the name of the funds, but they use some federal funds to be able to begin to create a workforce development program for flaggers. And I think that CSX is on board with that. I'm not sure about some of the other railroads, but we're going to look at that from federal highway perspective and see if that's something that we can carry forward to other railroads, other regions across the country. So we'll see if we can relieve some of this problem with railroad flaggers holding up projects and right of entry and things of that nature. Plan reviews by railroads. Most use third-party consulting engineers for this. Most railroads do have an online submission portal and a project manual, public projects manual. We try to, if a project does get hung up, we are able to sometimes work with our partners at the railroads through this community of interest and try to see where the problem lies, the challenges lie, and if we can make any headway through the community of interest. So that's been helpful there. We talk about things like what is eligible for reimbursement, what about additive overhead rates, audits, indirect costs, things of that nature, and state railroad agreements, like I mentioned before. And then the Section 130 projects that we talked to. So eligibility questions are common, trespassing, pedestrian accommodations, etc. And I went through the hot topics, but some of them, of course, are flagging maintenance fees that railroads ask for. So that's a hot topic. Trespassing, Section 130, and then emerging technologies such as drones and autonomous vehicles at crossings. So some of those are hot topics. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what we do with the community of interest. If you are interested in joining any of these and you're not already a part of it, please email me and I can get you on the list. Our next meeting it's a virtual meeting. It's April 1st. Oh, what time is it? I can tell you. I think it's 2 to 3:30 Eastern. Don't quote me on that. But I'll put my email address in the chat. And like I said, if you want to be part of these meetings, just shoot me an email. And that's all I have. If there's any questions or comments or concerns.
Excellent. Thank you. I think with that, we will open it up to the floor. See if anybody's got any questions out there. I'll give it a minute or two, see if people want to type, or feel free to just unmute yourself and yell at the computer, and we'll answer some questions. But if I don't hear anything immediately, I had a quick question for Chris. You were talking about 275,000 up to 275,000 that you guys were given to local communities to close crossings. Does that include Section 130's newly increased? I mean, not new anymore. It's been 4 or 5 years. Is that purely MDOT funds that you guys are leveraging on top of the Section 130 funding?
That's purely MDOT funds, and it's based on an evaluation that we perform of the worth of the crossing going away. So obviously, lower density crossings are worth less money, but we start at around $75,000 and go up to 200 or 275 if the location had actually been identified as part of our Section 130 process, and we're out there at a DSGR and we say, hey, this crossing would be better if it just went away. And if they say, yeah, then it qualifies for the highest award. We do partner with the railroads and encourage them to try to offer as much money as possible, because then we would take advantage of the new federal matching money up to an additional $100,000, and we'd stack that on top of the state money that we put in. So some recent awards have actually resulted in close to $400,000 for a crossing closure.
Hmm. Cool. No, that's great. I know that's you said that number. I was like, well, that's pretty fat number, but you stack it on top, it's even bigger. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, we had a lot of low-hanging fruit in the first 10 to 15 years of the
Mhm.
program. So it's become more challenging to find communities and locations that are suitable for going away.
Yep. Yep. I'm sure that you are not the only person on this call that gets has that problem.
Yeah, but $400,000 opens a lot of eyes, a lot more than when we started, the cap was between 25,000 and 150. And as
Mhm.
time has gone by and as revenues have become more restricted and the cost of doing our Section 130 projects has gone up, we determined that it was reasonable and appropriate to raise the bar on the closure awards.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Understood. Thanks. Looks like we got a question in the chat from Julie. Do the railroads consider removing the crossing and restoring their track through the crossing as part of their match? So if they're gonna take the track out on a relocation project, are you gonna give them credit for doing the surface or anything like that?
That's an interesting question. Could you rephrase that? I want to listen to that very, very carefully before I answer.
Yeah, Julie, you just want to unmute and make sure so I'm not mistranslating or anything.
Sure. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, great. So we've had a recent discussion with one particular railroad who wants to consider that as their match and tells me that that qualifies to use the Section 130 is if any work that they do to kind of restore their track through that crossing then counts as their match per se. So we have always gotten a actual dollar amount towards the community from a railroad, and then this particular railroad wants to do more of like a match in kind or like a soft match with their work, which we've never had before, and I'm not particularly excited about that being that was always something that they just took care of, or that they did, and then there was a monetary incentive. Right now, that doesn't look like an incentive to me,
I
right? To the
agree.
community.
Yeah, I agree with that. We also have not had anyone propose that their work to retire the closed crossing environment should be counted. Um, I've heard of it before, and we felt that would be very, very difficult to quantify,
Hmm.
to be able to then document back to FHWA that yes, this amount of value was provided. So we've tried to avoid that and encourage encourage a financial match, because that's what the community is then able to use, right? I mean, we're incentivizing closures by offering them money that they can then use to make their own infrastructure and transportation networks better. And if a railroad were to just credit the cost that they used to remove the crossing, that doesn't really do anything for the community.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess I would say that if that is a persistent theme from them, I would run it past your local FHWA contact, your Section 130 contact, and ask their perspective. Not to put our Julie on the spot or anything, but I would think that that's probably a question that the folks who oversee the matching amount at the FHWA would have to weigh in on.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not something I can speak to, but certainly I can take the question back to my Section 130 counterpart in headquarters, or you can reach out to your division office and go about it that way. Just let me know which way you'd prefer. And you can always send me an email at that email address I put in chat as well.
Excellent. Thank you. That's good discussion. We got another one in the chat from Tammy over at Iowa DOT. This one's for Chris again. This is a good one. Do the railroads challenge in the Michigan Railroad Code with federal preemption?
Not to my knowledge, in the 30 plus years that the master agreements have been in effect. Again, I mentioned that we had one master agreement prior to 1994, and that
Mhm.
was with Amtrak, and that dated back to shortly after Amtrak was founded in the early 70s. But since the mid 1990s, when we put these standard agreements in place, and they're literally identical agreements, there's nothing different other than the names of the railroad in there. But no one has ever said, we're not going to do this. This has been preempted. And I think in part it's because everyone saves money and time in having a standardized process. So I think that if they were to challenge us and say, we're not going to use this, then everyone's work is going to become more complicated and expensive. And at the end of the day, these are mainly safety projects. We're just trying to make things better for the public. And delays in that and extra costs for that are something that we should all be working mutually to avoid.
Cool. Thank you. Any other questions we've got out there? Because if anybody wants to just go off mute and ask them while I look through the chat, see if there's anything else out there. Julie, a quick question for you. You mentioned you might not know this because I know you said this was a Pennsylvania program, but do you know if the Pennsylvania program where they did the workforce development, was that given directly to the flagging companies? Did it go through the railroads? Did it go through the DOT and then have to go somewhere else? I don't know if you have the details, but that was just something I was thinking about when I heard that was like, how would that get structured, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There is an agreement between like an official agreement between the division office and the state DOT
Uh-huh.
on that. And then from there, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So I'd have to pull up that agreement and take a look at that. I can do that if you're while we're chatting here. Um, but I don't know.
Mhm.
I can't answer that right
Cool. No,
now.
I didn't know if anybody else was out there, at one of the states trying to get it started. I'm sure that's one of the questions that they might have.
Yeah, and certainly, if anybody is interested in this, absolutely reach out to me. I'm going to be looking into this further. So, like I said, does it make sense to do this on a regional basis,
Mhm.
per railroad, nationally, or how does it work? Because some railroads have union contracts that
Yep.
prohibit third-party flaggers, and that might be on a regional basis, maybe not a whole national basis. I'm not sure. So we need to look into it and see what makes sense, right? So does it make sense for every state to have their own workforce development program, or can we do it, a little bit more efficiently?
Yeah, and do it in Chicago for some Midwest region or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't think about the union aspect and how you might have to look at, every railroad in a general area and see who can actually use this or not. So,
Right, right.
um, cool. Chris, you mentioned preemption, which was also one of the questions that I might have coming up. So go ahead, talk about that, and then we'll see if I still have a question.
Okay. So the railroad code is huge, like 400 different sections and a wide variety of things covering close clearances to employee safe space complaints and whistle post signs. And there's just a ton of stuff in there. So when I said that they haven't challenged us for preemption, that answer was couched in the fact that we're talking about master agreements and maintenance. They have challenged the railroad code as it comes to train horns. and maybe a lot of other states have seen that as well. We may have even been a test case for that back in 1999. CSX took the city of Plymouth and the state of Michigan to court because we had a law in the books as part of the railroad code that said that crossings could not be blocked. And so that's related to train horns and crossing blockages. And so when that went to U.S. District Court, they found that our law on crossing blockage was preempted by federal interstate commerce laws. So in essence, the federal government is the only entity that can regulate interstate commerce, and therefore any state or local laws on the books that said you can't block a crossing is not constitutional, and it was thrown out. So our elected officials have not removed that from the railroad code in the last 26 years, so it still sits out there. And I get calls all the time, people asking why we're not enforcing that segment of the law, and I have to give this same discussion and explain. So there may be small components of the railroad code that have been challenged, but when it comes to the meat of project development and maintenance costs and managing agreements, getting work done, none of those elements have been challenged. I hope that helps clarify.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think everybody appreciates that. That's Tammy is mentioning thinking of block crossings. Same thing sounds like it happened in Iowa. I can tell you being here in Ohio, unsurprising to hear that I got challenged and then got thrown out. That's the same thing that happened here a couple years back, probably more than a couple years back at this point. Yeah, I think that's the one that the railroads seem to be attacking as much as they can with federal preemption. So yeah, maybe you guys were first though. If it's the late 90s, you can put that one on your wall, right? We were number one. Um, I do have another question on a different preemption, but also preemption. So you had mentioned that road agencies were responsible for about 50% of maintenance costs for active warning devices. How does traffic signal preemption fit into that? Does that also get thrown into that, or is that a different expense? Or I know because sometimes there's been a lot of questions on how to allocate that and how that kind of works. So I didn't know if you guys had a way to do that.
We do not. The, in essence, the traffic signal element is owned and managed and maintained by the road authority. There's no cost sharing with
Mhm.
that. If the track wasn't there, they'd be maintaining that traffic signal anyway.
Mhm.
The installation cost for a pre-signal and the 500 ohm relay to take the railroad input is a nominal expense, and they're already out there every month to maintain that traffic signal system anyway. So in the railroad code where it defines the maintenance expense for active warning device systems, it's particular to the railroads and it's particular to the type, scope, and quantity of the active warning device materials that are out there, and traffic signals are excluded.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you for that. Anything else we got out there? Anybody have any other questions? Don't see any in the chat. Any last words from anybody, Chris or Julie?
I was just going to say I was looking for the railroad agreement that the division office has with the DOT. Please excuse me because like I was telling this other speakers here, we transferred over from Microsoft products to Google products today, and it's really difficult to find anything in my email. But I did misspeak. It's NS Railroad that has agreed to use the third-party flaggers, not CSX. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Cool. Cool. With that, I don't think I have anything other than a thank you to Chris and Julie, and I will throw it back over to Daniel to close us out. And then, thanks everybody for showing up today and participating.
Thank you, Sam, and hopefully my audio is holding up to close this out here. I want to say thank you to our speakers. Really appreciate you participating in this portion of our webinar series. Again, we recorded this sessions and we'll make that available along with the recordings of our previous sessions, and we will also have a white paper for each of the installments of this series published in the near future. Stay tuned. We'll be announcing the fourth and final portion of the series for April, and we're looking forward to that. So stay tuned for details. Again, thank you all for your participation. Thanks to our speakers, and we wish you all a great afternoon. Thank you so much.